Hi, and welcome to the 84th TiddlyWiki Hangout, which we're going to kick off slightly differently than usual. Here we go.
Jeremy, we can't hear it. You are muted.
Are you hearing it?
Nope.
You are muted, Jeremy.
How's that? So this is a TiddlyWiki jingle, which has been composed by a long-time member.
Don't hear it.
You're still not hearing it? Okay.
No, we don't hear it at all. It was a very different start, Jeremy. I think we should just figure it out later.
We'll figure out the technical details later. So I'll return to Mans's jingle, but first let me introduce my guests today. From left to right, we've got Eric. Eric, would you like to say hi, say where you're from, and say something about your work with TiddlyWiki?
Hi, my name's Eric Schulman. I'm from Silicon Valley, California. And I am the creator of Tiddly Tools, the manager of the TiddlyWiki online Google groups, and the author of Inside TiddlyWiki, the Missing Manual.
Indeed.
Did I get it all?
You did, I think. Well, there are many strings to your bow, Eric, but those are certainly the prominent ones.
All things Tiddly.
Thank you for joining us, Eric. And Jed, hi. How are you doing? Would you like to introduce yourself in the time-honored way?
Hi, I'm Jed. I am currently in the southwest US, soon to be in Paris, France, and I am using TiddlyWiki for my dissertation and stuff. I have in my socks that tiddlywiki.com, which is something I make, and I make other stuff. So.
I'm a bit worried that TiddlyWiki has consumed your dissertation and replaced it. But good luck with that, Jed. Glad you could join us. Mario, hiya. How are you doing?
Hi, my name is Mario Pitsch from Austria, near Salzburg. Contributed to TWclassic and with TiddlyWiki 5 with the language translation into German. Yeah, a little bit of what is it called? Pull requests in TiddlyWiki 5 repository.
Indeed, and in fact, I believe you were the first, or almost the first contributor to TiddlyWiki 5. And finally, Nathan. Nathan, I think, doesn't have a microphone. Nathan is a developer from the US who has been with us for 18 months or so. Refer back to previous Hangouts where Nathan has had the chance to introduce himself. So we attempted to kick off with the new TiddlyWiki jingle. Let me just screen share so that I can at least show you what's going on. So this is by a guy called Mans Martensen, who has been a contributor to TiddlyWiki for, are you seeing my screen? Yeah, you are. For I think quite a few years, 6 or 7 years. And like many people in the TiddlyWiki community, has other strings to his bow, in this case being a musician. And what you should be able to see here is a page from a site called MuseScore, which is software that produces sheet music. And one of its features is that it can post it to the web. And if I play it now, there's a chance that... Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Yep, we're good. Just turn it up.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Without question, that definitely sounds like the opening intro music to an American television sitcom.
Yes, it does have something of that jauntiness about it. But it's very cheery, and it made me laugh and smile when Mans first posted it to the group, and I'm sure that my delightedness with it will be echoed by everybody else's as well. It's a really cool thing to have, and I'm sure that we'll find fun things to do with it in the future. Eric, I'm looking at you to make a MIDI file out of it. I seem to remember you having an obsession with MIDI files in years gone by. So big thank you to Mans for that. And if anybody else feels like creating a work of art dedicated to TiddlyWiki, do please feel free. And I promise that we'll make a better job of showing it at the next Hangout. So now, this week I do have I see that we've been joined by Ed. Ed, would you like to say hi and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Ed Dixon. I'm from Las Cruces, New Mexico, and I'm trying to set up TiddlyWiki to be like a student notebook that can help with all kinds of things. And XAPI came along, and I realized that the integration between the two would be perfect, and we're working towards that now. So that's what I'm doing.
It's great to see you, Ed. Thank you for joining us. Unfortunately, I think my illness earlier in the year was at exactly the wrong time for the XAPI project, and I'm very conscious that I didn't get the chance to do some work on it back at the beginning of February, which was actually, the end of February, which would have been a good time to have done it rather than the end of April as we are now.
Well, I mean, you and I both. You know what I mean? I end up having brain surgery, so.
Well, yes, exactly. And in fact, that reminds me that Nicholas Spies, who some of you will remember from past Hangouts, is actually also in hospital today, and so our good wishes go to him as well. But for what he described as minor surgery, so we won't panic, but good wishes, and hope that goes well to Nick. So there were a few things that I wanted to cover today, but just to do the very quick and easy ones. I talked last week, I think. One of the problems is that the last Hangout actually was 3 weeks ago, but we on the 6th of June, if I can find the link. We've got the TiddlyWiki. Oh dear, where is it? We've got a TiddlyWiki meetup in Paris. Excuse me, that was me rather inelegantly just bringing up the link. I'm just going to screen share. So the site paris.twcamp.info was set up by Sylvain, who is organised TiddlyCamp Paris and has produced this amazing artwork for it as well. And bear with me, sorry. And also nicely styled TiddlyWiki. Sylvain asked me if I would contribute to the English text, but in fact I think what he's done is absolutely fine. And of course I'm expecting that this will be an event that is oriented for French people. That's the purpose of having it in Paris. So I shall be there, and I hope that other people will be able to come along too. Of course, we'll have a marvellous time, whether it's just me and Sylvain or whether it's 8 of us or 80 of us. And of course, I'm always interested to see how we can organise events like that to be fun and interesting for the attendees. So it sounds like Jed, tantalisingly, is going to be in Europe, but may not actually be available that weekend, which is a great shame. But hopefully we'll have some other faces there. Then I wanted to just spend a few minutes going through the new features in 5.1.8. There's particularly focusing on the things that haven't been shown in a Hangout before. But before I do, it may also be worth just talking very briefly about some problems that people have had on the groups with upgrading to the new version, to the release version of 5.1.8. After a bit of investigation, it turned out that, as far as I know, all of the cases that have run into problems have been because they were using an earlier pre-release of 5.18, which had a bug in it. And that bug was concerned with the way that single quotes were encoded in the HTML file. The bug meant that very briefly in the pre-release, if you saved a copy of the pre-release that had any single quotes in tiddlers, they would get replaced by the equivalent HTML entity when you reloaded the wiki. And that, it turns out, can break quite a lot of stuff because, of course, single quotes would be used often for widget attributes and so on. So if you break your single quotes, you might be breaking quite low-level bits of wiki text. Now, obviously, one of the issues with 5.1.8 was that it was in pre-release for a ridiculously long time, from December till April. And that is something that obviously we hope not to repeat. But I think the experiences that people have had is a jolly good warning to lay off the pre-release. I think as an end user, there is an understandable desire to have the latest and greatest, both in terms of new features and bug fixes. But in order for us to develop TiddlyWiki effectively, we need to be able to break the pre-release, and therefore, if you adopt the pre-release, you've got no way of knowing whether the version that you're playing with happens to be, a buggy version that was posted for half an hour and then replaced by a bug-free version. So we've got a reasonable release process with TiddlyWiki where it should be clear what version you're using. It should be clear how to upgrade to a new version. And my recommendation to everybody would be, if you're to just use the final release versions. It's obviously enormously helpful to the project if you can play with the pre-release versions and do an upgrade of your Workaday wiki with the pre-release just to see whether it works. But then at that point, step back to the previously released version, having done your bit to try and help us debug the pre-release. And yeah, so my sympathy, but I'm also kind of grateful that it's not grateful is the wrong word, but I mean one good thing that might come out of this having happened is making it clearer to people the risks that they run by adopting a pre-release. So
Jeremy,
hello.
Could you reiterate exactly which versions are involved? Like if you were using 5.17 and you go to 5.18, there's no problem, correct?
That's correct. Yes. So
it's only if you were using the beta of 5.18, and only in some cases.
Yeah,
correct?
and only a particular beta that was live for 24 hours or something. If you the TiddlyWiki version number is at the top of the Tools tab in the sidebar. If it's got -pre-release at the end, don't use it.
Yeah, I'm under the impression that there is a safe workaround, although I may be mistaken, which involves exporting. One way is exporting to JSON and dragging and dropping.
I mean, that does have that. It does have the effect of a workaround because when you export to JSON, you're bypassing the dodgy HTML serialization that causes the problem. I think for many people it might be easier to use the search and replace technique, which I just posted to the mailing list as well. I mean, just because it's less, well, depends if you're comfortable with the text editor, really. But anyway, either approach will work.
Well, I actually prefer a 100% tiddly solution, so I sort of like. Plus, I just want to say that exporting to JSON is also a good way of creating a lifeboat for your tiddlers, so that if you're ever in doubt as to what version they're compatible with. If you simply save them to JSON, you know that they've been safely saved off as just a block of data, and that in theory they're going to be compatible with bringing them into whatever future version of TiddlyWiki you might want. So I think of that as a lifeboat technique.
Yeah, that's not bad. That's not bad. But of course, TiddlyWiki will always support all the TiddlyWiki formats that have ever been in use. I mean, for the main TiddlyWiki HTML file. Okay, so
well, I'm thinking more about the case of where you run into a glitch or a bug or something, and it's hard to you sort of disentangle your tiddlers from that bug, because it crept in, and by making I think that before you upgrade, it might be a recommended process, although it's a little technical, to create a lifeboat before you upgrade, just in case you're going to run into a bit of a problem, because backing out of that problem can be a little bit hairy. But if you have a lifeboat, you can just go, okay, whatever, and you drop your tiddlers.
Okay, so now I'm going to screen share and we'll just talk briefly about a few 5.1.8 features. So hopefully you can see my screen, and we can go to tiddlywiki.com. So the first thing I was going to show, because don't think that we have seen this on a previous Hangout, was the support for background bitmaps. So now over in theme tweaks, there's some new settings, a page background image, and we have a drop down with all the available images. And you might also notice that I've added a couple of images, Blurry Lawn and Newnham Horizon. And if we go over to the types list, you can see them here and that one. And there's also Perlin Light, which you may not be able to see very clearly as one of those fashionable 3 years ago, crinkly textures. So Blurry Lawn and Newnham Horizon are both quite substantial bitmaps, and so they're both stored as external tiddlers. So they've got a canonical URI field that points to the actual URL. So both of those make quite good backgrounds. So let's put Blurry Lawn on. You can see one issue immediately is that the shadow effect we've got on the text in the sidebar doesn't work so well against this background because it's darker than the default grey. So we can switch to a new palette that's now included in the core called Dark Photos, which works better against a dark photo. There's also some settings for the page background image. There's what's called attachment, which is frightfully confusing. When you fix to window means that as I scroll, the image doesn't move around. And moving it to scroll with tiddlers, as the name suggests, as I scroll the story, you can see the background rolling up behind the sidebar. That works. The image attachment setting works in association with image size, which is grossly misleading. Auto causes the image to be tiled at its natural size. Cover causes the image to be resized such that it covers the required area. With scroll with tiddlers, the required area is the entire vertical stack of tiddlers. So as I scroll up the entire story river, I'm scrolling up the entire image. And if I set it to fix to window, you get a more expected result. So that's the situation where that's the full size of the image fixed to the window with the content scrolling over the top. And that's really the effect that I was trying to support. Those configuration options are there for other occasionally useful effects. If I switch over to Newnham Horizon, you see a slightly different one. Newnham Horizon actually doesn't really need the palette tweak because it's got a pale background. So we can do that and it works fine. The Perlin Noise one, called Perlin Light, that's designed to have the size set to auto because it's designed to tile. So you may not be able to see it very clearly thanks to low resolution YouTube, but it gives a faintly perceptible texture to the background of the page. And as I say, 2 or 3 years ago, it was frightfully popular. That's the version that scrolls. It's a bit weird. If I maybe import another image, there's actually no, it's not. So that was done, as I say, because although let me switch. I find that developing new features for TiddlyWiki falls into several different categories. There's some much needed things that require considerable bits of re-engineering. So for instance, we would all like to have much more customizable sidebars, so I can choose to have different sidebars on different sides of the screen, a toolbar across the top or the bottom, and to have the content adapt. And that's very a good example of a very desirable feature. They'll be quite visible to people. There's also features that I think are terribly important that'll be practically invisible to a general audience. So for instance, having a decent multi-user behavior when running under Node.js. But this background thing is an example of a feature that's actually really attractive. It's incredibly easy to do. If you look at the commits that brought that feature in, you know, it's a couple of dozen lines of wiki text here and there, and the vast majority of it, the vast majority of the complexity, is actually in the configuration options in the control panel. So it's a problem with features like that is that potentially there's a lot of them, and I really want to avoid TiddlyWiki's control panel turning into Microsoft Word's preferences window, which, you know, I remember in the past as just being this horrendous, massive dumping ground of loads and loads of options that, you know, very difficult to navigate, very difficult to find your way through. So I think the artfulness here is to try to make a good job of picking the features, you know, that are important or that could be important for a large number of users. One of the reasons why I like features like this is that it makes it easier for people to customize their TiddlyWiki. And although at the moment I don't think the first user experience doesn't really emphasize customization, one of the things that we've noted before is that a lot of online services encourage users to customize their profile or their page or whatever, you know, whatever the artifact is that they're creating with that service, in the belief that a web presence that I've customized, I've got a slightly bigger stake in it. And so, so I think there's more things like that I would like to do, more things that have the effect of making TiddlyWiki look more like a traditional website, you know, so that it's not, so that it just sort of blends into the internet. So those are, you know, conventional features, and that that play to the customization, making it easier for end users to customize TiddlyWiki. Any thoughts on that background stuff, or that little ramble on features like that?
It just makes me think I have too many configuration options on everything I make.
Yeah, well, you've got a real talent for that stuff, Jed. It's, some of your earlier work has you know, really inspired me, and in fact, I'm currently in my day job. I'm doing a contract at the moment, and right now I'm using TiddlyWiki, you know, as a tool to put together some prototypes. And I started finding that stuff to be much easier than I expected. Probably a surprising person to be saying that, but I think because well, probably like some of the TiddlyWiki users, there's some things that I've wanted to do with TiddlyWiki for a long time. So in my head, I still think of them as, you know, being goals rather than goals that I'm trying to achieve rather than goals that I have achieved. Sorry, that didn't make much sense. So now let me just go back to screen sharing, and Mario already, I think before the Hangout started, mentioned one of the other issues with 5.1.8, which is that now, if I go to the language drop-down, there aren't any, just British English with its tiddlers. Now, this was done to make tiddlywiki.com smaller. There are more things we could do to make tiddlywiki.com smaller because it hasn't really been an objective in the past to worry too much about the size of it. This is the beginning of worrying about the size of it, and I think we'll probably end up doing some more things to make it smaller, including possibly, as has been mentioned before, making it so that tiddlywiki.com is, rather than being a dynamic TiddlyWiki HTML file, tiddlywiki.com might mutate into being a static HTML file generated by TiddlyWiki. I mean, still, if we did that, it would still be highly interactive, but the idea would be to have a landing page that was a bit more lightweight than TiddlyWiki itself. So the where have the languages gone? If you look in editions, there's now a grand total of 2 editions listed, the empty edition and the new full edition. So the full edition, if I open that in a new tab, simply has all of the available plugins loaded, and that's actually not so useful in terms of the plugins. It's really for being able to explore the language options for TiddlyWiki. So possibly here, actually, I think this should be a nice graphical list with, with flags on it that looks perhaps more like what we see here in the plugins listing. But now, what an enormous list of translations we've got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, up to French. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 languages. I can't remember how many we got up to on TiddlyWiki Classic. It was more, I think, a good deal more. But maybe 30 or something? Do you remember, Eric? There was a time when Martin Budden was maintaining them. But I mean, the TiddlyWiki Classic translations were never as up to date as these guys are as well. So I said before the Hangout that I think it might make sense for one of these link panels to link to that full edition, and perhaps that would be I'm not sure whether to replace one of these. One question I had for people was, do you think that it is appropriate for TiddlyWiki Classic to have one of these prime positions in HelloThere? I don't really... Oh, actually, we could investigate... Eric, we could look at the traffic on TiddlyWiki Classic versus TiddlyWiki 5, because GitHub reports on both of those.
Indeed. My inclination is that while TiddlyWiki 5 is definitely mainstream now, and TiddlyWiki Classic is in the sort of archival sort of condition, there's still a lot of people doing TiddlyWiki Classic who might be looking to find it easily without having to know that there's a classic.tiddlywiki.com. And so having a link to it is important. I don't know if it has to be one of those graphical swatches there, but it should definitely be called out in a way that is extremely easy to find, because if you go back to TiddlyWiki after having not been there for a while and discover that it's the new TiddlyWiki when you're sort of looking for old classic stuff, you need to be able to get to where you were going with the sort of an aha and one-click kind of a motion. It doesn't necessarily need to take up a video square, although I think that as long as there's enough room for it, I kind of like having it there.
Yeah, I mean, I did it like that obviously because the thumbnail's so recognizable. and part of what I was trying to do was to.
How often do you plan on cycling those thumbnails, changing them out, updating them?
Well, I think particularly now, heavily. I'm very open to feedback as to whether those are the best 6 links. I'm acutely conscious that oh, hang on, let me screen share again. There's the middle panel is labeled a gentle guide, and then links through to essentially the old HelloThere that we had on tiddlywiki.com. That's a bit of an interim thing. I don't think this really does constitute a gentle guide to TiddlyWiki. If anything, it's a gentle introduction. But then we already have got a link labeled Introduction to TiddlyWiki. So I think that's a bit confused and needs to be resolved. The helping TiddlyWiki, my concern there is the poster, makes a very attractive thumbnail. But the poster is slightly different than the material in helping TiddlyWiki, if you see what I mean. I mean, the poster is just a part of it. So I think the only one I'm happy with of these is the developers link. But my issue, well, I don't think I'm even happy with that, because my observation is that on most other websites, as a developer, I would expect to look at a horizontal toolbar at the top of the window for a link saying developers. There is a very established way of signaling that. So that may be the next transformation, is to introduce a top bar that would be shared across all the tiddlywiki.com sites that would make it easy to switch between tiddlywiki.com/dev and tiddlywiki.com, and link to the introduction and so on. So it'd be say a dark horizontal menu of external links to other pages on tiddlywiki.com would be the idea. We've also lost the ribbon. I think I talked about this last week. Sorry, at the last Hangout. The concern, the value of the ribbon was that it made it incredibly easy to see what version of TiddlyWiki you were on, what version TiddlyWiki was on, by visiting tiddlywiki.com and looking at the ribbon. The problem I had with it was that the design of the ribbon as we were using it is very specifically a clone of the ribbon, of the GitHub ribbon, and so it's used normally as a signal for developers to say, this page is on GitHub, click here to go there. So I was a little uncomfortable with misusing it, because these subtle cues, they're what makes up the internet. They're what makes it usable. Your expectation of what's going to happen when you click on a Twitter link and so on. It also makes it, I think, a little bit cleaner visually. So now we've got a 5.1.8 banner here in the link panel. And my idea is that for each new release, I will change that bitmap. So the bitmap, if we look in the types list, is called new release banner, and I'll just literally update it with a completely different image for 5.1.9. So let's hope that each release is visually distinctive enough to yield one of those icons. There's a bit of background noise from somebody. I can't quite tell who it is, but a sort of hum. I think somebody, brilliant. Somebody might need to mute. But I'm not certain whether that's, again, the strongest cue. When I think about having that horizontal toolbar across the top, again, maybe a muted 5.1.8 at the top right or in the middle or something would be the right thing to do. So other new features, we've discussed the languages. So large number of an unprecedented number of new languages, and quite a lot of updates to existing languages as well. The katex plugin has been upgraded. I think we probably discussed this before, with the what was the latest version of katex with crucially better symbol support, and that was the #1 complaint that we had from users of the katex plugin. the help plugin we've definitely shown before on Hangouts. I think the help plugin has turned out to only be a partially successful experiment. So if I visit the pre-release, pre-release has got the help plugin built in. So its original idea was an easy way to be able to play a YouTube video, a tutorial YouTube video, whilst interacting with TiddlyWiki. And the issues with it are that we don't have any of those tutorial videos in a form that would be useful to be watched like that. And that really you would think that users would appreciate this, not so much on tiddlywiki.com as in a new blank TiddlyWiki that they've started work on. So I'm beginning to wonder, I think this is something we discussed before, that we've always had empty.html. It's very important, I think, that is TiddlyWiki without anything in it, that it's the minimum plugins and everything to allow TiddlyWiki to work. So therefore, if we're going to have an edition that includes the help panel, I think that maybe we need a getting started edition, which would largely replace the empty edition in the links on, well, sorry, the links on tiddlywiki.com that currently go to the empty edition would perhaps go to this getting started edition. And the idea would be to free us up to include in the getting started edition plugins and possibly loose tiddlers that help guide the user through the process of getting up and running with TiddlyWiki. So the sort of thing that we've discussed before, again, would be a plugin that guides the user through the process of saving changes and detects when the user has successfully saved changes and prints out a hooray message kind of thing, and guides the user step by step and doesn't progress until the user has successfully done a save. There was a, let me go back to tiddlywiki.com. Another change that unfortunately didn't work out quite as we'd hoped was sticky titles. So you may remember for a long time there's been a theme available called sticky titles, and it didn't do anything on Chrome, but in Firefox and Safari it has this feature. Oh, well, in order to show you, I'll have to show you the next part of the story, which is that instead of making it be a separate theme, we've now made it be a here we go, a setting that you can change. So where is it?
You just passed it. It was in the other panel. Yes. It was at the very top.
Titles, of course, it's right at the top. So now with sticky titles turned on, as I scroll, you can see that the title stays stuck to the top of the screen. That I do that by default in all my personal TiddlyWikis. I find it incredibly useful. The reason why we made it an option is that the implementation in Firefox doesn't play well with CSS transforms. So another feature that we didn't, that's sort of staying in beta, so to speak, is the stacked story view. So it's present in the plugin library. You're welcome to play with it. It's not that it's buggy, it's that it doesn't quite do what I had hoped entirely yet. But it's we've shown it before. It's an exploration of a slightly different visual metaphor for navigation, where you have a stack of tiddlers, and we can alter the, I'm not sure what the word would be, but alter the angle of the stack in order to, for instance, make it easy to pick out the titles of tiddlers that you've got open. And whilst clicking on these things and showing it to you, I'm being very careful not to scroll the page. If I scroll the page, oh, sorry, if I turn on sticky titles and then scroll the page. Right, so you can see what's happening. that Firefox has got confused about where the top of the screen is. We don't get this problem on Safari, so therefore I don't think it's an unsoluble problem. It actually kind of looks quite cool, doesn't it? But it makes it completely unusable, and therefore that's why we had to make this be a switchable option. So now back to tiddlywiki.com. There was
Jeremy.
Hello.
Somebody has joined and they're requesting a unhide. I don't know who they are though.
Hi, Roy. Roy, you're here for the TiddlyWiki discussion. I trust. Great. Let me just show you and stop screen saving. Roy, hello. Have you got a microphone? Okay, well, glad you could join us, Roy, and do feel free to ask questions through the chat box, and if I'm busy rabbiting on, I'm sure that somebody will let me know. And just looking at the Q&A list, there's a question from Mans Martensen, who's the composer of the TiddlyWiki jingle, who said that he had some errands, couldn't follow the Hangout from the start. Did you sing the jingle? Mans, I didn't even try to sing the jingle, I'm afraid. I think it's going to take more practice, and I'm not sure that the internet is ready for recordings of me singing as well. But I do hope that we get a vocalized version from somebody who's a more talented singer than me at some point. It would certainly be fun to hear the lyrics being sung properly. And now let's just go back to the 5.1.8 discussion. There's a couple more things I just wanted to draw attention to. Oh, I need to screen share again. So one of the other changes was these links at the bottom to try and provide, more eye-catching, stronger calls to action for ways to get more involved in TiddlyWiki. So each of those, Twitter is the place where there's a lot. I post everything important to the discussion group, but the TiddlyWiki Twitter feed is where I post interesting TiddlyWiki links, screenshots, and so on as I find them. And the mailing list and GitHub, obviously, are the focuses of discussion within the community. There was so many things that now are really so old. You probably got used to it, but having icons on control panel, I was very uncertain about that when we first did it. I've really got used to it, and now quite like that effect. I like the way that it kind of marks those Tiddler's Tag Manager, Advanced Search, and Control Panel as being special. It makes it visually clearer that they're not like the Tiddlers that one creates oneself. The other thing, of course, is the plugin library. So I think I've shown this before. And you hit the get plugins, get more plugins, open the plugin library. You get a searchable listing of plugins, and you can single click install them. And you get a prompt now to remind you to save changes and reload after reloading plugins. Jed has just posted a question you may be able to see here. Has there been a change to the visible behavior of the save button? It just stayed red until the wiki finished saving, instead of turning grey as soon as I clicked on it, I think. Jed, no, there hasn't been any change there. But indeed, if I'm in Chrome here, if I click on Save Changes, which is currently red, you'll see that even if I cancel saving the file, that it does immediately still turn grey. In TiddlyFox, you can see now we're red because the draft tiddler has been created, but I haven't performed an action that triggers an autosave. But let's do that. And yeah, I think it is changing. I can't honestly remember, Jed, but I think it changes on successful dispatch of the save attempt. But I would have to check the code, and it certainly hasn't changed. Let's refresh to lose that. And then the other things are, I think, fairly minor, but there might be a couple to draw people's attention to. Well, this one, this is a sort of embarrassing saga that helps to teach me a lesson from time to time. So what happened was that somebody requested that we add support for the .zip file type. What that means is that we added a line.
I mean, where do you start? The jacket, the vest, the specs, that ring, the cigar, shiny gold tracksuit, talking to a girl in an extremely unpleasant manner. Jimmy Savile!
That was interesting.
Yeah, and Jeremy, you're muted if you were talking now.
Jeremy, you got muted. You have to unmute.
I got muted, right. Yes, well, at least he wasn't rude. But it's really annoying because of that, it means that we will have to continue being quite hard on people who we don't know who try and join the discussions. And I don't like that. I'd much rather be welcoming to people. Anyway, after yet another interruption, it was a matter of adding knowledge of the .zip file extension to TiddlyWiki. The reason was so that TiddlyWiki knows that it's a binary file type. And then what that means is that if you drag a zip file into TiddlyWiki, instead of trying to display the contents of the zip file as wiki text, it will instead know that it's a binary tiddler, know that it can't display it, but still successfully store it as a tiddler. So it actually caters for a really marginal use case. It is people who want to be able to store zip files within TiddlyWiki so that they can be downloaded from TiddlyWiki later. Now, it's not an unuseful thing, but it's clearly the wording for it, which I said added support for embedding zip files. I gave lots of people the idea that the zip file support was far deeper. So we had a message to the mailing list saying, I dragged a zip file into TiddlyWiki. I expected to be able to access the data within it, and I couldn't. And that stuff is not something that I think we would ever support in the core, of course.
Jeremy?
Hello.
Yes. Currently, I tried this, and once you've embedded a zip file, what can you do with it?
You can construct a link so that you can download it. Okay. And as things stand, you'd make an anchor link, an A tag, with the download attribute and the what's it called, the href attribute containing the base64 representation of the zip file.
I tried to do that, and it wasn't successful.
We really ought to. It ought to be part of the default template, in fact, so that if you do have a binary tiddler, you are automatically always offered a download link. But post to the discussion group. It's I'll be very happy to help you get that right. I'm running a little bit low on power. Let me plug in. So I think the lesson there is that I've got to be always aware of using of the multiple audiences in TiddlyWiki. So as a software guy, I think of this as a release note. If you want to know more details, you click on the link, you'll get to the commit, you can see exactly what changed. But of course, that's not really a useful way to communicate for a significant and important part of the audience for TiddlyWiki. So I think maybe I need to explore making the release note here on tiddlywiki.com a little bit more end-user friendly, I think. Bunch of new icons. I'm very happy to accept either icon artwork or ideas for icons, but really it's only the things that we need in the core or on tiddlywiki.com that I think make sense as as icons to include in the core plugin. Bunch of bug fixes, and for me the most significant one is that if I drag a link, you can see there's no green bar at the top. So that means that TiddlyWiki hasn't recognized it as a drag yet. If I drag into a text box, then great, it works, and the expected action happens of the text of the link being inserted into the text box. And this is to avoid a problem in TiddlyWiki in the previous version, where when you dragged, you would basically re-import that tiddler. And just to emphasize, if I have another TiddlyWiki window open there, I would create that new tiddler, and as soon as I drag it into the other window, it's fine. So the importing behavior is as expected. This was a bit of a nuisance to implement. It requires a global variable that sort of felt a bit lumpy, but is the kind of usability thing I'm quite keen on paying a bit more attention to now. So we'd had quite a few reports from people who had been surprised by that dragging behavior. It's the kind of thing that people don't always know that they're clicking the mouse. People don't always hold the mouse still. It was far too easy to do accidentally. And yes, and some bug fixes, getting more things working under Node.js. So this time around, we've got the highlight plugin working under Node.js. So there's more scope for those kinds of things, I think. So that was 5.1.8. Oh, I see we've been joined by Matt. Hello, Matt. How are you doing? Have you got a microphone? Matt, hi. Have you got a microphone? No. Okay, no microphone from Matt. I'll refer you to the earlier Hangouts that Matt's attended for his introduction, but thanks for joining us, Matt. So we've just been talking about 5.1.8. I touched on briefly the fact that it was appallingly late. So the previous version, 5.1.7, came out just before Christmas, and it was May the, whatever it was, 18th or something. When 5.1.8 finally limped out. There was a number of reasons for that. So I mentioned earlier, I think, that I'd been poorly back in February, well, through into March as well. And that took a hit on my productivity. But I've also, sadly, shown you one of the other problems, which was that right in the middle of 5.1.8, I took on two development tasks which couldn't actually be completed. So the stacked story view and the help panel, both of those dug into the time for 5.1.8, but didn't actually make it, weren't included in the release, or I don't think of them as being a complete part of the release. So the good thing there is that they were plugins, both of them, so they're easy to omit. So I think one of the things I say to would-be contributors of to the TiddlyWiki core all the time is don't be in too much of a rush to get things into the core. It's much easier to work on new features as plugins, and I think that's true for me as well now. So you can be my conscience. If it looks like Jeremy is committing massive new uncertain features to the main core, then we should raise the alarm. Things like the background thing, much easier. I could be confident when I started that within shortish time that I could complete it and tick the box. Whereas so both the help plugin and the stack story view plugin were kind of experimentations as well, and so that's the worst thing to throw into the middle of an already late software project. I can see Matt fiddling around with headphones and stuff. When you do get to be able to speak, Matt, do shout, and then we'll return to you for an introduction. One of the other things that was really amazing about 5.1.8, and it's kind of a function of it having been late, is that it was the most contributors that we've had to TiddlyWiki. I'm just jumping around to count them. It looks to me probably. Sorry, I'm probably pulling a ridiculous face. But anyway, there's like 25 contributors. That's really huge. I felt a lot of pressure a lot of the time with 5.1.8 because it was so late and because so much else going on. But my goodness me, TiddlyWiki ticks the box as an open source project with that scale of help that I'm now getting, contributions that many of the new features that I mentioned, well, not so much the big ones that we've been discussing, but many of the more minor new features have been contributed by others. This, in fact, 5.1.8 is the first release to have the hand of Astrid Ellickson in it, who created the Railroad plugin and has done an outstanding job, as far as I'm concerned, on updating the documentation, making it much more rigorous and formal, and hopefully reliable as well. So that's really great. Really happy to see TiddlyWiki progressing that way. And as I was saying a few minutes ago, I'm using TiddlyWiki in some work that I'm doing that's not related to TiddlyWiki at the moment. And even being in that position, I can see that it's starting to get to be quite a meaty product. And still, I mentioned a couple of features that I'm embarrassed that we don't have. So more flexibility about the sidebars. We've got Leo Staley coming to the group, who still feels that the one thing that stops him from using TiddlyWiki 5 is that he wants to be able to use the TiddlyWiki.js layout. And to me, that TiddlyWiki.js layout, being able to configure your sidebars so that it resembles TiddlyWiki.js would be one of the marks of success of an implementation of more flexible sidebars for TiddlyWiki. Any other thoughts from anybody about 5.1.8?
I just found out that it broke the little Twitter script thing that I have on one of my sites, but...
Oh, sorry, what was the... Do you know what the issue is? Is it something...
No, I have no idea, and it's almost certainly something that I have done not anything with TiddlyWiki. But
well, still, I mean, TiddlyWiki. My aspiration is to make it as easy as possible for plugin authors. A big part of TiddlyWiki's success in the past has been the ecosystem of plugins. Hopefully, by having a much firmer architecture in TiddlyWiki 5, we can make it much easier for for us to continue to develop and innovate in the core without breaking people's plugins. And it's a very important goal for me, partly because we get quite a lot of traffic. Even today, we get quite a lot of traffic with people asking whether a TiddlyWiki.classic plugin works in TiddlyWiki 5. If we allow too much backwards incompatibility to creep in with TiddlyWiki 5 plugins, it would be even more confusing for end users. Nathan says, can you explain how to set up the server side for a plugin library, or is there an example for it somewhere? That's a very excellent point. It's a slightly technical discussion, so it may be that I will just do it very, very briefly. But Nathan, hopefully it'll be enough. So the first thing is to just look at the file structure. So let me a screenshot. Oh, I'll just switch Matt on as well. Okay, so if I go to my file explorer and then into my Git repo, so this is the folder that basically gets posted to tiddlywiki.com. So tiddlywiki.com/index.html is that one. Oops, sorry, index.html is that one. So you can see a few things sitting here, things like talkie is in here and so on, that are all stuffed onto tiddlywiki.com. Then there's a folder called library that then contains a folder named for the version. Then within that there's an index.html, and then slightly odd directory names, recipes, library, then a tiddlers.json file, and a tiddlers folder. So let's actually just open this whole repo in Sublime Text so it's a bit easier to see. So the index.html is not a TiddlyWiki. So this is a handwritten HTML file, but in fact it's saved with TiddlyWiki, it's created with TiddlyWiki. And it contains the metadata for the plugin library. So you can see fields about each plugin in the library. And below that, including the icons, so that's consuming a fair old amount of space actually. But then after that big block of JSON with that metadata, there's a tiny bit of JavaScript, which basically does a window add event listener to listen for messages. And so somebody's got a bit of background hum that might be good to remove. And we won't go into it, but this is where this guy is basically, this HTML file is hosted in an iframe by the main TiddlyWiki, and then messages are passed to retrieve data from it. And as you can see here, this guy uses HTTP to access the individual tiddlers. So if I go into that library here, you can see each individual tiddler is a JSON, sorry, each individual plugin is a JSON file just containing the fields of the plugin. And we've got this index.html file, and tiddlers.json, which is essentially the same information actually that is in index.html, but made available as a JSON file so that other people can write code that accesses the plugin library, because extracting that metadata from within the HTML file would be a bit awkward. So when we're up on, if I switch to the TiddlyWiki editor, there's a, in the right place, yes. So there's a configuration tiddler that is part of the core with that title, config official plugin library, that contains the URL of the plugin library. And so for the way things work at the moment is when I upload TiddlyWiki, the plugin library gets automatically updated, and then because it's on GitHub pages, it gets served. When I'm working locally, I run a little tiny HTTP server to serve that library folder. And the reason for that, maddeningly, is that you would think that that URL could be a file URL, but in Chrome it can't. So that means that if you're just using, so if you're just interested in Firefox, then you can create your own plugin library just by duplicating the directory structure and having it locally, and then you'd create a tiddler with such as that official plugin library one that I showed you. that contains the file URI. But if you want to be able to support Chrome, then you'll need to use some little micro HTTP server. Jed, the other two bits to just point out is that there's an addition which is used to create the library. So it's called plugin library, and you can see that it uses the plugin library plugin, and that's the only use of the plugin library plugin. So the plugin library plugin contains the components that you need to use to create a plugin library. And here are the commands to actually save the files. So that this saves.
You're not screen sharing if you're intending to.
Oh, that's my habitual problem. Okay, sorry, Jed. So now I think I was here. So I was trying to show you that there's an addition called plugin library. There's actually nothing in it. It includes the plugin library plugin, which actually contains all the components that are needed for creating the plugin library. What this is really here for is these build commands. So there's a special command, makelibrary, which you should look up, but basically it just packs all the available plugins into a JSON tiddler. Save library tiddlers, similarly, is a command that's only used in creating libraries. And then here you can see, for instance, there's us saving the upgrade library list in JSON, and here is us saving the index.html, which is produced from that template. So down in the plugins folder, you see here's the plugin library guy. So you can see, for instance, here's the template of that HTML file. So you can see how we use transclusion to add in the JSON and everything. And in fact, the JSON, you can see there, is done by viewing that JSON tiddler upgrade library list, which is the thing that contains the, well, actually that one is the one that contains the metadata of the plugin library. The tiddler upgrade library just contains the entire library, so both the text and the metadata of the plugins. And that is not a TiddlyWiki module. That's why it's got a module type library. It's not intended to be executed in a TiddlyWiki context. It's just there to be baked in here into the HTML file that comprises the plugin library. So I would say, Jed, that stuff is about the most intricate bit of the TiddlyWiki build process and everything. And you know, it's kind of complicated because it reuses TiddlyWiki to do all of these tasks. That, you know, if this was a normal web project, we'd probably be using Grunt or something for. But in TiddlyWiki, everything that plugin library does, you know, is things that TiddlyWiki needs, or everything that we do as part of building the plugin library is things that TiddlyWiki needs to be able to do. Anyway, in the future, there's no reason why we can't package that plugin library stuff a bit better and a bit smoother, so that, for instance, there's a single command that will save an entire plugin library, or in the browser to generate a zip file containing all the files comprising a plugin library. So I think of the plugin library mechanism as being the first step in the road to federation. We talked about this before, I think, but the federation, in order for my TiddlyWiki to incorporate some content from Matt's TiddlyWiki, for instance, that involves my TiddlyWiki being able to read the content of Matt's TiddlyWiki. And it turns out that's only possible if Matt has hosted his TiddlyWiki on a site that supports something called CORS, the Cross-Origin Resource Sharing Protocol specification, and lots of otherwise perfectly good HTTP storage does not support CORS, including GitHub. So all that iframe stuff and Windows messaging, that is designed to enable us to I mean, it solves our immediate problem of offering a plugin library on tiddlywiki.com, despite tiddlywiki.com not supporting cause. But it also establishes a technique that we can use pretty reliably. So the next, well, I don't know the next step, but I mean, a very easy thing to do next would be to create in TiddlyWiki to add the feature that tiddlers with a certain tag identify the URL of a remote TiddlyWiki, to which maybe a filter specifies which tiddlers you wish to subscribe to from that wiki. And then one would be able to trigger an action to go ahead and load that wiki and import, synchronize the latest tiddlers that pass that filter. So for instance, what that lets me do, I've now got a TiddlyWiki that's got my stuff in it, and it's dragged in the stuff of Matt's that I've asked it to, and the stuff of Eric's that I've asked it to. No, well, the point, sorry, in the sidebar, Matt's saying import only those tiddlers, not the full TiddlyWiki. This is what gets cunning. Basically, the iframe technique that we have, it means that what the host TiddlyWiki, so the TiddlyWiki that's hosting the plugin library or other wiki that it's synchronizing content from, is talking to a JavaScript API that is offered by the underlying TiddlyWiki. So that means that there can be complex negotiations on both sides. So for instance, the wiki doing the embedding, so my wiki that's embedding Matt's, could say to Matt's wiki over this API, what tiddlers are you trying to share? And then it's up to Matt's JavaScript to, or configuration I should say, to drive the JavaScript to return the correct tiddlers. But equally, we can do that filtering on the receiving side as well. So it means even though Matt's only posted a static HTML file to the internet, what he's created is a JavaScript API to that data. So it gives us an enormous amount of flexibility. You could, for instance, write a plugin library that generated random plugins that don't actually exist as files, that was just responding to those messages by creating random streams of bits. You could create, the current plugin library goes off with XML HTTP request to go and get the actual plugin text. But you could imagine one of those things that live updated itself. So I embed an iframe, the JavaScript within the iframe causes it to keep going back to its storage layer, grabbing any additional tiddlers, and then again, we can establish a protocol that enables that embedded wiki to siphon off the tiddlers that it contains. But look, we're talking too much about the mechanism without perhaps focusing on the benefit of it. So the benefit of it is discussion. So the idea is, or a very simple idea that of federation supporting discussion is this. I write a tiddler called I Love Cats, and I publish it in my TiddlyWiki at germaline.com. And then Matt has an opinion about this too. So at matt.com, he publishes his own wiki. In order to comment on my tiddler, perhaps let's invent a protocol, but perhaps he writes a tiddler with a title that has the same title as my tiddler, and maybe a field that points to my site that says I'm a reply to this. So then, if I well, we haven't really got the right words here. If I federate with Matt, so by that I mean Matt's wiki is included in the list of wikis that I do this periodic partial import from, then when I've got when his reply has made it into my wiki, then I need a view template that underneath each tiddler lists any related tiddlers, which would be tiddlers that have, for instance, their reply to field set to the name of that tiddler, and then I can present them in tabs. So what it feels like to me is I'm on my own private TiddlyWiki. I've written some stuff, I've saved it. It happens in the background to being published to the public internet. I now am in the habit, when I go back to my TiddlyWiki and I reload it, press a button to make it go off and sync. So it'll go and retrieve, in this case, retrieve Matt's wiki, and then suddenly, bang, I've got a reply to my post by Matt visible to me, which I could then in turn reply to. So I think that's a very powerful technique. It's the downside of it is that in order to see Matt's reply, I need to be listening to him, as in I need to be syncing with him. Now, in practice, to really support the TiddlyWiki community well, it might be nice to have a centralized aggregator that aggregates all of the tiddlers that are part of our community discussion, so that instead of needing to sync with, if every hour I was syncing with Matt, Eric, Ed, everybody, it would take a while. But it's not, it's not a ridiculous thing to do. It's what Google does. In order to read our sites and index them, they are repeatedly accessing them and pulling down all of the content. And again, like Google, we can use HTTP headers to avoid reading an entire file if it hasn't in fact changed. So it's not terrible performance. It's a kind of brute force technique, but as I say, to me, it's magical because it allows people to federate without having control of a server. You need to be able to host an HTML file, but you don't need to own a server in the sense of being able to install software on it or connect a process to port 80. And I still think that's huge. I still think that the big divide on the internet is the world of people who are condemned to only be clients on the internet and the world of people who are both clients and servers. And if you own and control a server on the internet, your experience of it is completely different. You can make stuff. It's like you're in control. Whereas if you don't have access to a server with the current architecture of the internet, you are condemned to just participate in other people's servers. And as we have found, with a few notable exceptions like Wikipedia, most of the servers out there, guess what? They're owned by advertising companies who will exact their price for your use of their server. So TiddlyWiki has always been targeted at that kind of sense of personal freedom, initially as a tool for individuals to publish. So it's a way of shouting at the world, but hopefully bringing in these federation features will make it be a useful tool for discussion. And as I say, as I implied, although the use cases that we've been talking about are kind of point-to-point ones where TiddlyWiki is owned by individuals, extract content from other TiddlyWikis in order to create an aggregated view that contains the writings of more than one person. Sorry, I made that sentence too complicated. Now I can't quite think how it's going to end. Anyway, so we're on the road to federation. Please use the plugin library, try it out, see if there's any situations in which it does not work, because that's the technology that seems the most suitable for us to use for federation. And yeah, I think over the next few months we ought to be able to get something up and running. So now let me, before Nathan said, how are the metadata files assembled? Okay, so that's what we've just it's absolutely fascinating. Is it something you might look to? This is one of those things that harks back to a discussion I think it was just before you joined, Matt, that there's big lumpy features that are pretty big undertakings and low-hanging fruit, like the background thing for setting background images. It's very difficult to choose which of these big features we do. To me, and I think to a lot of us here, the federation is very exciting and interesting. But it's exciting and interesting as an area for experimentation. The results of doing it is going to be yippee, we can run some experiments. Whereas, some of the other things that we might want to do we can be more confident that they'll be immediately useful. And I don't know, I don't really have a scientific basis for it when I'm doing, for making those kinds of decisions. In the past, it's people, well, the things that make a difference is if there's something that I need for my work outside of TiddlyWiki, obviously that's a very strong driver. And so for the community, I guess it is good if Jeremy is working on things that are connected with TiddlyWiki, and where those changes are in other people's interests as well as Jeremy's interests, if you see what I mean. People asking is still a big driver. Long ago I realized that for me, the best kind, well, not the best, but one of the best types of conversations is where my part of it is to write code. Somebody asks some complicated question, or asks a question about something that is complicated. Writing code to simplify it is a great response, and so for that reason, illogically, people asking does have an impact. And I guess there's a lot of it is my personal taste. With the federation stuff, I think I've done the technical exploration phase. So although that plugin library architecture doesn't look like federation, doesn't get presented as federation, it absolutely is the implementation of federation. Is literally picking, synchronizing a tiddler from an external source. So making it, the next stage is experimenting in terms of its user features, and yeah, that's a bigger undertaking, I think. Matt saying in the sidebar, I believe that if we get those aggregation thingies, like a shift of content to TiddlyWikis, i.e. special interest groups where niche applications will evolve. This should at least partly address the problem people have with TW not solving any particular problem. I think you might be there talking, Matt, about editions. So this is absolutely one of the unrealized dreams of TiddlyWiki 5, was that my idea was that when you go to tiddlywiki.com and you say, I want to get started, the first step is choosing from a list of canned TiddlyWiki types, a to-do list, a maths notebook, a linguistics notebook, a novel planning guide, a wargaming RPG notebook, so that the user would get started with the framework, the skeleton that would help them use TiddlyWiki effectively. I made the point before that many of those editions, I don't think they're massively custom in terms of needing special plugins. It's largely about the content and the terminology, and that's something that we saw with TW5 scholars as well, that one of the, just by kind of representing TiddlyWiki with more clarity about what the entities are that you're manipulating. So instead of talking about tiddlers, talking about notes or historical figures or what have you, makes it that much more accessible, because it's one less sort of layer of abstract hypotheticals. I see. So Matt's point is that the federation aggregation will serve as an infrastructure to get interested parties together to create editions. Yes, absolutely. And yeah, we talked about this endlessly. The Google groups got a lot more useful to us since we discovered the settings, such as editing posts and titles, which we didn't know were there. But it's still simple things like people being able to share demos of what they're trying to do, all that stuff. You feel like you're in two different worlds. It's not very convenient to type wiki text into Google Groups. So you can't do inline examples and so on. There are still, as soon as we go down the federation route, we do also have to be concerned with protection against malicious behavior. So this is the old thing that it's easy for us to say as software people, don't add somebody to your subscription list unless you trust them. But actually it's very difficult. And also Matt, or Jeremy, may be an unwitting carrier. So Matt may have inadvertently tried to federate with a wiki that contained malicious content. Maybe didn't notice. Maybe the malicious content was lying in wait and waiting until it got delivered to somebody else. So that's, I think many people have found it frustrating over the TiddlyWiki 5 lifetime that there have been features of TiddlyWiki that we've kind of made less useful than people would like. And it's all been about security. So people wanted to be able to write inline JavaScript, and for reasons, Matt's apologizing for bringing malicious code. You're only a carrier, Matt. So there's been some concern that people would like to be able to do inline JavaScript, and yet there is no way that we can offer inline JavaScript in a way that is safe. And that's a huge, huge deal. And lest we forget, existing online services like, I don't know, everything from Google+, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. They goes without saying, they go to endless trouble to make sharing safe. So because there are the only environments for sharing unsafely is, the old Windows 95 environment of floppy disks and USB drives and dodgy websites and so on, which I think people can recognize when they're in a dodgy website. But the expectation that something like Facebook or Twitter or TiddlyWiki could unwittingly unleash malicious stuff on them, that's not going to be most people's expectation. So I think it would take some care. So yes, finally, well, any other thoughts on Federation? That was we did a pretty amazing segue from Nathan asking a question about the plugin library to being able to answer Matt's questions about Federation, and that's been on my list for I think a few Hangouts as something I wanted to return to discuss. What would you suggest is the next step to focus on for Federation? Matt, I would say for you as a TiddlyWiki wikiist, as in somebody who writes wiki text, I think the thing you might find most interesting is to just dig around how the control panel is, how the plugin library in the control panel is implemented. So there's a number of new messages and so on. All of it you'll be able to see, and I don't pretend that it's quite complicated wiki text, not going to be the easiest thing to wade through, but if you're methodical, and obviously you'll be guided by the fact that you're familiar with how the plugin library behaves as a user, so you can, it's pretty easy to make that correspondence between the wiki text that you see and the user interface that you see. But I think you'll immediately see how to approach the Federation. So when you hit, for instance, when you hit the open plugin library button, it sends a message. Well, perhaps should we have a look at this? No, I think I'll leave it as homework, but it sends a open plugin library message. That open plugin library goes off and loads the plugin library, and then it pulls in these kind of skeleton tiddlers, one for each plugin that's available in the library. So at that point, those aren't the plugins, they're little individual pointers, and that's what then gets listed via a list widget in the pop-up that lists the plugin library content. And then again, the install button is a message for install plugin or something that then whizzes off, and so have a look at that, and I think you'll see the bit that'll be hard for you to do is to create something that's compatible with the plugin library. So the next step is to make it so that TiddlyWiki documents expose the same JavaScript interface over Windows send message as the plugin library. So then what that'll enable you to do is, you remember that tiddler we looked at that's got the URL of the plugin library, then at that point we'd be able to add tiddlers that contain the URLs of TiddlyWiki documents, and presumably they would appear somewhere else in the user interface, where you'd get a list of all of those subscribed TiddlyWikis. With what we've got at the moment, the easiest interface would be a button for each one that says sync, but I think to do it nicely we would also need a framework for splitting up the task, sync with Matt's server. Once that's done, sync with Jed's, and we don't have at the moment a mechanism for those kind of long-running tasks. But hey, I can dream up a few ways that we could do that. So yeah, I think it'll be quite fun to do that. It's what I just described is adding that interface to TiddlyWiki is largely the addition of new code, and that code closely resembles code we've already got in the plugin library. I don't think it's a biggish piece of work, but it's not complicated and it's not disruptive. The bit that's liable to be complicated and disruptive is figuring out a useful user interface over the top of that stuff. And yeah, so that's really the next stage. So maybe the 2 stages: retrofitting the JavaScript message API on TiddlyWiki itself. That needs to be switchable, I think, configurable, and then starting to develop a user interface, which will require some code changes. So at the moment, all those messages, there's no selectiveness. It asks the plugin library, what have you got? And then it lists all of the results. There's none of that filtering that I spoke of. Okay, anything else? Anybody else on any of that? Let us jump to finally. I think I'll be able to go a bit longer than usual, so I'll probably go another half hour or so on the call today. I wanted to jump to this discussion that's been prompted by Danielo, I think more than a month ago. I won't read the entire thing. Well, perhaps I will need to actually, but basically Danielo's saying TiddlyWiki looks like a framework. He's saying that the points in common is that they provide widgets and tools. They accept new tools by the use of plugins. They determine rules to construct the UI other than just by specifying HTML and CSS. They also allow you to use normal HTML and CSS. They can be used to build a responsive site, and they have a community behind. So I think some of those points actually are characteristics of open source projects rather than frameworks in particular. So open source projects are at their most useful when they have a big community behind them, and the pattern of using plugins to accommodate different needs is something that you see in a lot of open source projects. It's the way in which TiddlyWiki. I'm sorry, TiddlyWiki. It's the way in which open source resolves the fundamental conundrum that different people have different needs. And Danielo goes on to say he's created 3 web apps using TiddlyWiki that don't look like TiddlyWiki at all. It'd be great if you could share those, Danielo, actually. Annoyingly, that's what I've done as well. I've mentioned it a few times, but TiddlyWiki work that I've done over the last couple of years outside of TiddlyWiki, in a couple of cases, has involved completely throwing away the standard TiddlyWiki page template. So Danielo then goes on to say, if it is, in order for it to be a framework, perhaps we need to make these changes. And the changes are that the core should be minified, because it's 1.5 megabytes at the moment, and the ability to select parts of the core and the default set of widgets that you want to use. So they're the same. Oh, and then his third thing is that's all. So those are the same thing. The TiddlyWiki core is a bunch of individual tiddlers. Those tiddlers are packed together into a single plugin, which we call the core. But there is nothing stopping people building a different combination of those tiddlers to make a core that is either bigger or smaller. But I think it's worth stepping back to. There's an implication that that it's desirable for TiddlyWiki to be a framework. So here's my answer to this, or I think my answer is that I think TiddlyWiki has a lot in common with frameworks, but it's not a framework. And the reason why is because frameworks are tools for developers to stand on the shoulders of other developers, and the audiences of those frameworks are developers. And frameworks, the effective ones, they provide the right functionality, but they also provide an interface that's the right balance for developers to understand the functionality and to be able to use it effectively. So they're an artifact, a peculiarity of the development community, not peculiarity, I mean a feature of the development community, I think. Although TiddlyWiki does the same things, to me, the fundamental difference is that it is an application, and it is not designed to help developers to do stuff. It's designed to help end users by being, first and foremost, a product that end users can use out of the box to do something useful, to keep notes, but also to have this capability of being deeply, deeply customizable. And that customizability is aimed at end users and not at developers. So in fact, I have a bit of a rant, which I'm not sure if I've done on the Hangouts often, but it's roughly that other developers who have access to servers and so on the internet, we inhabit this glorious world where we can make stuff. And as a developer, I'm privileged. I'm privileged to, it's like having the power of speech in a world where not everybody has the ability to talk. It's an amazing capability. And for those of us, I'm talking here in a group that includes many other developers as well, but we've got a magical capability that allows us to build artifacts in this new, most important forum for human interactions that we've ever seen. So that puts us in a really special position. And I hate it, because I want everybody to be in that position. So for me, a big goal of TiddlyWiki is to lower the barriers of making stuff for the internet. And so oddly, it's that has driven TiddlyWiki to also simultaneously be so different from frameworks. So TiddlyWiki's internal architecture pays no attention to developer comprehensibility, really. Its architecture is my attempt at the minimum possible solution to the constraints that were needed to build TiddlyWiki. And so, plays to developers by trying to be simple, but its goals are entirely in terms of the functionality that it supports. So I guess Danielo's question actually phrases it in a really nice way, that yes, it could be made into a framework, and with changes it could be made into a framework, but I think that it would be hated by developers, because developers are incredibly conservative. That's partly why there's so much fuss and bother whenever there's a change. Or look at the way that PHP has lived way beyond its natural and expected life. Matt saying, what would you say is the most efficient way and strategy for this? For what? Matthias? Are you still talking about the federation stuff there? So it's a really interesting. Lowering the barrier. So Jeremy's way of lowering the barrier is, I think it's got multiple elements to it. Infrastructure-wise, it's saying that it's really important that you can use TiddlyWiki without needing to control a server, without needing to have any software on your computer other than a web browser. So I mean, that to me, you're not on the internet if you don't have a web browser. The price of admission for TiddlyWiki is something that everybody already has. I think that's hugely important. In terms of comprehensive, I'm not sure that's the right word. TiddlyWiki's goal is to present users with a simple data model that is endlessly reused to do everything within TiddlyWiki. That data model is, by data model I mean that's the idea of there being a bag of tiddlers with a unique title. That data model, developers would barely recognize it as a data model because it's very, very simplistic. So that data model was chosen not to support the rich, not to support the way that developers think about adding about extensibility, but rather to be a model that was sufficiently rich and yet simple enough for people to comprehend. So I'm not sure if I'm explaining, because I'm thinking aloud, I'm not sure I'm explaining it very well, but I think the theme for me is that TiddlyWiki's purpose of being an end-user tool is riddled through its design. My concern is that although functionally it's got elements of a framework, that if one tried to repackage it in that way, I think it would, to a developer, look ridiculously alien to them. So maybe that's getting less true. I mean, I've made the point before that things like Angular and React, both of them have striking but different similarities with TiddlyWiki. So I mean, those things, they're not really, well, they may also be frameworks, but they are MVC architectures. They are, there's many things that are frameworks that are not also MVC architectures, and TiddlyWiki absolutely is one of those, because an MVC architecture is something you find in all kinds of systems without them necessarily being frameworks, if you see what I mean. So I should also, I mean, I think Danielo, sorry, you're asking the question as if it's self-evidently desirable for TiddlyWiki to be a framework. I'm not against that. So my opinion is that it isn't a framework. I'm not against somebody trying to experiment with what it would feel like to change it so that it could be presented as a framework, but it's not something that I would spend time on. I've made the point before that, well, as I just said about developers being conservative, I found that at Osmosoft that developers who had an already quite well-established notion of how applications should be built, many people with that background struggle to see the point of TiddlyWiki, because to them the things that TiddlyWiki lets you do are things that they can do much more quickly using the array of tools that are available to developers. So although I know lots of people here are developers, Nathan, say, would proudly, like me, identify himself as a developer. I think kind of by definition, really, developers who end up with an interest in TiddlyWiki, there's something else in their minds going on other than development at that point. TiddlyWiki, the bit of TiddlyWiki that might appeal to you, I think, appeals in a different way than any other attractive new JavaScript library that you've decided to adopt. Let me just pick up on Matt saying, coming from a non-programming background, I'm thinking we have a lot of untapped power in our TiddlyWiki community. I'm referring primarily to what you might think of as peripheral competence, but things like marketing could be used to increase the number of programmers. What can we do to tap into this non-developer power? So I think you're saying there, Matt, that there are activities that could be performed that would help the TiddlyWiki project that aren't development, and can we get that done? Oddly, I think we're seeing a bit of that, of course, because one of the non-developer powers is the power to compose songs, and we saw earlier, how we can tap into the songwriting, the latent songwriting capabilities of the TiddlyWiki community. We've also recently had Duarte producing the poster artwork, and right now he's working on these amazing reskins of the TiddlyWiki default theme as well. And in terms of marketing, for instance, there's a contributor called Richard Smith who I've been working with on trying to put together a sort of what's the word? A landing page for TiddlyWiki in education. So the problem that we were trying to solve was, although to us TiddlyWiki is self-evidently valuable in education, if I send a link to tiddlywiki.com to an educator, I think it's quite hard for them to figure out what the relevance of TiddlyWiki is to education. I mean, there's several. They need to figure out why it's an educational tool and why it's a good educational tool or might be useful to them. And I think that's such an important audience, given our recognition, over recent months, that education is such an important area of use for TiddlyWiki, that I think that's worth doing. Anyway, and Richard is a teacher, and so in putting together this text, this landing page, he's he's also a TiddlyWiki hacker, but he's using his non-TiddlyWiki skills, his knowledge and understanding of education. So that's not to say, Matt, that we aren't that we're doing enough, but it really makes me happy that the contributions that we receive are not all in the field of development. The Jed mentions documentation. More documentation examples would be the fastest way to market like that, short of paying for actual advertising. Yeah, documentation is desperately important. I mentioned before Astrid's efforts on the reference documentation, which is a amazing tour de force reorganization, reimagining of those bits of documentation. And I've mentioned before that I think the reference documentation is really the heart of tiddlywiki.com. I would like there to be better guide, introductory information as well, but that it lives or dies by the reliability of the reference material. One other untapped potential is simply application knowledge. How can we capture and frame needs for these groups? So this is that what I might call it domain knowledge, that many people in the TiddlyWiki community have domain knowledge of something else that they may be applying TiddlyWiki to, like Richard, interested in applying TiddlyWiki to teaching, or domain knowledge like playing the electric guitar, which they're not so directly applying TiddlyWiki to. And yes, that's really interesting, isn't it? But I don't know, I mean, I think the way that we're phrasing this is how, and Matt, don't take this as a criticism, this is just, we talk about untapped potential, and it's actually, I think that's a bit it's a way of thinking about how a firm would operate. So I've had this idea for a long time with TiddlyWiki that my job is to work on TiddlyWiki whilst presenting a broad surface area for other people to collaborate with me, but that I need to act with the single-minded purpose as if I was alone in the room working on my own as well. So me sitting down and working on TiddlyWiki oddly isn't a collaborative act, it's a highly solo act. I have to kind of switch off email and switch off thinking about people, to undertake a tricky task like that. And so I think that the magical thing about open source is the way that, for me, the amount of effort I need to put into collaboration is independent of the number of people who choose to collaborate with me. So, whether there's 1,000 people or 100 people tracking the development on TiddlyWiki and, building every commit I post, doesn't make that much difference. I mean, in fact, a bigger community would in some sense. Well, it doesn't make much difference to the actual work. And I really like that. I really like the idea of doing your work in a way that sets up the conditions to allow other people to collaborate. And it's not that I don't want to pursue people. It's that, as I was saying before, there's so little time, there's so much to do, and so little time, that if I can make it so that everything that I do, serves TiddlyWiki's needs, or makes TiddlyWiki better or something, and also presents a bigger surface area for people to collaborate. So where I'm getting at there, I suppose, is trying to, well, let me go with what you were saying next. One, untapped, not least because unpaid and voluntary work has to be rooted in fun. Simple as that. Yes, it does have to be fun. Exactly, and it has to. It's one of the things that's weird about a community is that people drift in and out, and it's I mean, anybody who's been watching the Hangouts, you'll see that there's certain people like Mario, for instance. I think Mario's been on 98% of the Hangouts since the very, very beginning, and I'm incredibly grateful for Mario to provide that consistency, constancy. But you see through the Hangouts how people come into the community, they're around for a while, and then they kind of drift out again. They might come back again. And it's a cycle I see all the time, and I completely understand it, because it's the cycle of having a life, you know. And to some degree, I think for some people, some of the time their attention is drawn to TiddlyWiki because they have an itch to scratch, you know, they've got a problem to solve or something. So that's really weird. It means that the community is a sort of shifting patchwork of people. So notwithstanding the much valued role of the people, again, Eric, been around in the community for ages, but you know, any of us, in fact, could drift off and drift back again as well. So it means that the way, it's just to highlight that the way that we would normally organize other human endeavors doesn't work in open source. So one of the most obvious things that you do in a, you know, when a group of humans get together to do something is assign responsibility for something. But that's very difficult in open source if that person's going to drift away. So I think it's valuable that people should be able to drift away. You shouldn't feel like you're chained to an open source project that won't let you escape. That would be awful. But say, you know, we give, there's some task that we assign responsibility for that task to an individual. That person drifts away. That drifting away, maybe it's a gradual process. We see a slowdown in their response time. So there ends up being a period where the rest of the community is kind of waiting for them, where there's, and that seems really counterproductive, because it means that it's punishing that person for drifting off, when really we should be celebrating the things that they did when they were part of the community, and, you know, hopefully encouraging them to come back again. So guilt tripping them, as we might say colloquially, seems like the worst thing to do. So I don't pretend to have answers to all of this. I think sometimes I do read stuff about open source governance in other projects. But I don't know. I think a lot of it isn't applicable to us. I mean, as you know, the big open source projects with lots of activity, they tend to have people working on them who are paid, and so, you know, all bets are off. That's a completely different type of organization. TiddlyWiki at one point, of course, was also like that. What am I trying to say? Not sure. But I was going to say that another difference between TiddlyWiki and other open source projects is one that we discussed endlessly: the fact that TiddlyWiki is aimed at end users and not developers. And so the members of the TiddlyWiki community, generally, this is their first exposure to open source. They don't have any prior experience of it. They probably don't have any prior experience of software. My impression is that of the people who are running TiddlyWiki under Node.js, a pretty hefty chunk of them have never used Node.js before. You know, they're just using it in order to get to grips with TiddlyWiki. So those differences mean that we can learn some things from some projects, but I think we really need to make our own path and sort of figure this stuff out. And as I said, Boris, at the beginning, with the list of contributors for 5.1.8, we are doing some things right. You know, some combination of the project being attractive enough and the community around it being helpful and useful and well organized enough that we are getting things done. We're you know, wading through more work than I could do on my own, and that's really, you know, that's the value of it being an open source project for everybody, including me, we think. Any other thoughts on any of that? It was a bit of a ramble. I apologize for how incoherent my rambling can become. So are there any other issues? Any other thoughts from anybody else? That was a good ramble, says Nathan. Thank you. Yeah, well, so I think I could be more coherent. Don't forget, TiddlyWiki started as a response to that. I find it so difficult to write. I can blather on about my deeply held beliefs, but composing stuff into a cogent narrative, I still find very hard, and I'm hugely appreciative of the talents of people who make that look so easy. And as discussed, I've got distracted by building TiddlyWiki and never seem to have quite got into the long form writing. But some of this stuff, really needs to. I've got a TiddlyWiki full of draft posts, as in posts not for the mailing list, but blog posts for Medium. I've got a long rant about servers considered harmful, but it's really hard for me to get that into a form where it's publishable. Sadly, the gap is pronounced. Ed says, I agree. I think this may be one of the best Hangouts yet. We have looked seriously at the future directions and its specific goals. That's been great. Wow, Ed, thank you. I think one of the problems for me about Hangouts actually is that they all kind of merge into one. And so I'm very apt, I think, to think of things that we've discussed once in June 2013 as being adequately covered on the Hangouts. And perhaps, yeah, I think we maybe I need to be a bit more, this has been discussed before, but maybe we need to be a bit more organized about the agenda of these Hangouts, because it is too easy for us to get distracted by, some topics are more useful than others, I suspect. And it's certainly these kinds of discussions are, I can't think of any other way that we would share the same information. It's very tricky to have this kind of conversation on the mailing list, for instance, even though we have talked about federation on the mailing list. This is the perfect forum. Matt says, if only we had a TiddlyWiki to note things into. Very true, very true. Well, yes, anyway. Okay, so I think we'll kind of draw towards the close. I'm not sure when the next Hangout... Oh, I am actually. I think the next Hangout will be next Tuesday, but I'll confirm later on this week. So hopefully back to a reasonably stable timetable. So any other questions or thoughts from anybody? Otherwise, I think you know what we need to close with. So let me, screen share. So before we jump to the close, as always, and I'll not screen share until we've done this, I would like to express my sincere thanks to all of you for coming, as well as those of you who I have seen in the Hangout. There's also been, I think, up to 5 viewers at the same time as well. I always say the same thing, but guys, your time and attention is one of the things that makes TiddlyWiki possible. I'm immensely grateful to you. It's a big commitment to do these kinds of things. To come to a meeting with no agenda and no outcome, that's a generous use of your time, and as I say, much appreciated. So we're going to see ourselves out with Mans's composition of the TiddlyWiki 5 jingle. So we'll let this play, and then we'll say a quick goodbye, and I'll close the window. Thank you, Mans. I've just posted the link to the chat window there. Yes, great fun. So everybody, thank you very much. We'll wave goodbye and I'll press the stop broadcast button. Cheers. Bye bye.